Unit 3, Chapter 9, Lecture, Globalization.
Let me begin this lecture by telling you a story to put things in perspective. It is a story about the people of Bhutan, a principality partly controlled by India that they tell about themselves. When this remote mountain country first made contact with the outside world 40 years ago, the United Nations, or UN, asked about their gross national product. The king of Bhutan said he wasn't sure his country had one of those, but was interested in knowing what a gross national product was. Once the UN explained that a gross national product was the total value of all the goods produced and all the services provided in a country in 1 year, the king said he thought Bhutan would rather not have one. They would rather have a gross national happiness. Now, here was a country where people seemed perfectly happy to have little contact with the outside world. How odd Bhutan of 40 years ago seems to us today, when modern telecommunications and world trade have virtually connected every corner of the world to every other part of the world. Unlike Bhutan 40 years ago, today's world is characterized by globalization. Thousands of books have been written about globalization, and there may be as many definitions of the term, all depending on the perspective of the writer. Now, for our purposes, let's use this definition. Globalization is the acceleration and intensification of economic interaction among the people, companies, and governments of different nations. Did you get that definition down? Let me repeat it. Globalization is the acceleration and intensification of economic interaction among the people, companies, and governments of different nations. So how does globalization work in concrete terms? Well, let me give you some examples. Cheaper modern communications have made it possible for a call center in India to provide technical support to a person who is having a computer problem in Australia or the United States or anywhere else in the world. Or a transnational sportswear corporation like Nike can design its products in Europe, produce them in Asia, and sell them in North America. And there are many US and other international companies that have built factories in Mexico to manufacture products that used to be made in the former countries. Globalization sounds like a very positive concept, a wonderful example of international cooperation that benefits all concerned. But it is at the same time a subject that ignites the anger and mistrust of many people in the world: environmentalists, unionists, anarchists, and some governments, among others. You can see that the skeptics come from many different fields. Some skeptics feel that globalization allows rich countries to take advantage of poor countries, which skeptics feel are only hurt by trying to be more capitalistic. And globalization is definitely about capitalism. Its goal is to increase the flow of goods and capital around the world. We might call it the brother of capitalism. If globalization is included in a book that focuses on the United States, it's because the world sees the United States, and to a lesser degree Western Europe and Japan, as the driving force behind the process of globalization. When one thinks of capitalism and large transnational corporations, the United States is probably the first country that comes to many people's minds. And two big international organizations that deal with development, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and the World Bank, are closely associated with the United States in many people's minds. Furthermore, popular American culture, from Coca-Cola and McDonald's to popular music and TV programs, is so widespread in the world that critics of globalization are quick to point to the spread of this culture as US cultural imperialism. Now, we can't really go into cultural imperialism today, but we can look at three different aspects of globalization to understand this complicated process a little better. First, we'll talk about what critics object to in globalization. Then I want to discuss some cases where globalization has been a success, and I don't mean rich Western countries. I'll finish up by talking about some concrete objections critics of globalization have in order to see if there is any solution. Critics of globalization will point out that poor countries are often given bad advice by international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank, or that these organizations try to impose unrealistic global trade rules. Often, poor countries are pressured to follow the rules as a condition for a loan or for aid. Now, for example, a poor country might be advised to adjust the value of its currency, or it might be advised to eliminate tariffs or taxes on goods imported from other countries. Many poor countries are also pressured to respect patents and copyright laws. Patents on new inventions and copyright laws most often protect technology from the West and keep the technology from being used more freely by poor countries. Poorer countries may also be told to privatize industries and banks. Privatization means that the government sells the industries and banks to private companies. Furthermore, poorer countries are often encouraged not to subsidize goods that they produce. A subsidy is money paid by a government to reduce the costs of producing goods so that their prices can be kept low and therefore competitive in the world market. These are some examples, but not all of the trade rules imposed by organizations. But I think you get the picture. Now, did you get all 5 examples down? 1. Adjust currency. 2. Eliminate tariffs. And 3. Respect patents and copyright law. 4. Privatize industry and banks. And 5. Not subsidize the goods they produce. We don't have to go too far to find countries, Argentina comes to mind, that have tried to follow all these rules, only to find that their economies have suffered instead of prospering. Critics of globalization will say that the international organizations do not have good intentions, that they want conditions where rich countries or companies can take advantage of poor countries' cheap labor. A more objective and perhaps fairer conclusion might be that these bodies are trying to lead the poor countries to success by copying conditions in richer democracies, where these rules are more or less observed now. That is not to say, however, that Japan, Germany, and the United States developed their economies following the rules, only that the rules are more or less observed now. I say more or less because the United States and Europe have had subsidies on their agricultural products for a long time. Another reason for trying to impose trade rules is that the organizations feel that investments from rich countries will not come to poorer countries that do not follow the trade rules. And there's probably a lot of truth in that. Whose opinion you agree with, that of critics of globalization or supporters of it, will depend perhaps on where you are from and how you view capitalism itself. To get an idea how these rules can, in some cases, hamper development instead of encouraging it, let's take a look at some countries that are not big Western powers, but have integrated into the world economy by not following the rules. It may help you to understand the whole situation better. It's common for critics to claim that globalization has only benefited rich Western countries, but this claim is oversimplified. Millions of workers in Japan, Germany, and the United States have seen their jobs move overseas where labor is cheaper. So they certainly wouldn't feel they were benefiting more from globalization than workers in China or Vietnam. To get on with my second point today, let's look more closely at some non-Western countries that have achieved long-term economic growth in the past decades. I'm thinking here especially of China, India, Taiwan, and South Korea. Harvard economist Danny Roderick, in Trading in Illusions, writes all 4 countries have taken advantage of opportunities to engage in world trade. That is, to achieve integration in the world economy. And all 4 countries have achieved remarkable economic growth in recent decades. We must emphasize, though, that these 4 countries have accomplished economic growth without following all the tough rules imposed by international organizations. China, for example, broke practically all the rules, including not respecting the requirement of private property rights, but is making impressive economic progress. India was, and still is, one of the most protectionist economies in the world, but has made great progress economically. South Korea and Taiwan, when there were few global trade rules, had high tariffs on imported goods, public, not private ownership of a lot of their industry and banking, government subsidies on goods they exported, patent and copyright infringements, and restrictions on foreign investment. The point is that all 4 countries have achieved integration in the world economy on their own terms. They did not and could not realistically follow another country's example because local conditions vary from one country to another. As Danny Roderick has written, there is simply no substitute for a homegrown business plan. To finish up by talking about our 3rd point today, we have to take up 2 problems that critics of globalization bring up all the time. Sweatshops, where people work long hours in crowded conditions for a relatively low wage. And second, child labor. The critics are right. We should all be upset by sweatshops. At the same time, we must consider that these same workers compete with each other for the jobs provided by large transnational corporations, which generally pay better than local employers. In other words, the workers prefer this work to the alternative. As for child labor, all of us should be bothered by young children working in many countries. Conceivably, we could manage to prohibit child labor worldwide. However, if we don't make sure that there are schools and the children in question go to them, we may be condemning the children to a fate worse than child labor. A recent article in The Economist pointed out that it is poverty rather than globalization that creates poor working conditions. You may or may not agree with that idea. To conclude, in my estimation, globalization is probably going to continue because capitalism has become the dominant world economic system. And capitalism, in some form, will continue to exist as long as people want newer, better, and more things than they have. The world is no longer like Bhutan of 40 years ago. Countries like China and India have a lesson for developing countries that rich countries either cannot or will not teach them. As Danny Roderick so succinctly puts it, economic integration is the result, not the cause, of economic and social development. We are speaking here of the country's own economic and social development. Let me repeat that statement because it's important for you to take down. Economic integration is the result, not the cause, of economic and social development. It may surprise you, but I'm hopeful about the future, actually. I'm thinking about the recent World Trade Organization meeting in Cancun, Mexico, where the world witnessed something that had never happened before. A group of 23 poorer nations came together and spoke as one voice. They spoke out against agricultural subsidies by rich countries, subsidies that make the poor countries' agricultural products less competitive in the world market. The 23 countries did not manage to abolish the subsidies at that meeting because the talks broke down. But there is a feeling that these countries have an awareness of their need to speak up for themselves and hopefully to deal with richer nations on their own terms. If this means that they put the social and economic conditions of their own countries ahead of integrating into the world economy, they can only benefit. And perhaps the rich Western countries need to practice what they preach. How can they tell poor countries that tariffs and subsidies are bad when they use them extensively to protect their economies?